Thank you for such a generous introduction. I really appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. This is a really nice way to spend my evening. I'm working under the assumption that everyone who would come to an event like this shares some values with me, and that it is some shared values that bring us together, especially values associated with Laudato Si and Laudate Deum. So I'm going to turn on my presentation here. If all goes well, I believe you still will be able to see me. Mark, everything looking good there visually?
Looks
Fantastic.
great.
So I wanted to begin by saying a bit about my relationship to these two documents. So as Mark said, I teach at the University of San Diego, where I've been for 16 years now. So, one of the ways I encounter these is they're very important to the institution. I should also share, I'm not Catholic, so I am one of the people relating to these documents as a person of goodwill. I'm Jewish, and it's been so I teach Jewish studies at University of San Diego, and it's been a remarkable time to be at a Catholic university that takes Laudato Si seriously. To be at a Catholic institution under Laudato Si, and an institution that's thinking about it, has been very inspiring to me personally. And the first way I really encountered these documents was experiencing that affinity, noticing that some of the issues that I cared about were coming up with people who were talking about these documents to me. As I spent time with Laudato Si and then later Laudato Deum, I really found myself moved. And I want to begin with a little story about a kind of a connection I have with Laudato Deum, because this kind of took my sense of affinity with the ideas and made it stronger. So some of you may know that when Laudate Deum, this apostolic exhortation, was released on October 5th, 2023, the Vatican, as is usual with these kinds of documents, invited a number of people. You see them here in the kind of semi-transparent image to, in this case, the Vatican Gardens, to kind of introduce the document. And I have the four names of the people who were invited noted there. And the thing I want to share about them is that all have been active in addressing the link between food and climate change. Neither Laudato Si nor Laudate Deum really point very aggressively to agriculture or food. They're talking about the concerns at a higher level. So it was very heartening for me to see that clearly when they thought about the people in the world who are going to be receptive to this message and who they wanted to be ambassadors, they immediately thought of people in the food movement, and notably people who are three of the four quite prominent advocates of plant-based diets. And we'll talk about how that really is one of the most powerful ways to reduce climate impact and address a lot of other issues, is just be eating lower on the food chain. The connection I have with this is that Jonathan Safran Foer is a personal friend, and I've worked with him on food issues. So he, after the event, sent me these pictures. He's the one in the lower picture. It's his baby in the background. And the book you see Pope Francis holding in English is called Eating Animals, which is a book about these issues, and that Jonathan wrote, and some of my work is mentioned in that book. So it felt incredibly thrilling just to know that the Pope held a book in his hands in which my name was mentioned, and has kind of deepened my sense of affinity with these documents and what they're trying to do. So let me kind of sketch out what I'm going to do in the modest time we have. I want to say a few things about aspects of Laudato Si, in particular, its kind of opening passage that has been particularly kind of inspiring to me. And I'll say a little bit about the kind of general state of the world where agriculture is that I think resonates with that document. And, I'm doing two things. I'm going to try to kind of point to some key theological ideas, but then I'm also going to deliver the bad news, why animal agriculture is so concerning, why trying to reduce the number of animal products we're consuming would really be a big deal. So I'm going to give you the bad news. And Jennifer, who we'll transition to for most of the talk, is going to give you the good news, which is that there are very tractable, very effective ways to do this work in community that really have a great track record of working. So turning to Laudato Si, we have this wonderful diagram produced by the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development that is an attempt to kind of summarize the broad goals of Laudato Si. And if we were doing a seminar, we would spend some time on how every one of these goals is related to food. I'm going to especially highlight how the four that are at the upper level of this diagram are connected to food. And really, my focus will especially be on these two items that are at the very top of the diagram, which I think in some ways are the quickest way to kind of summarize what Laudato Si is talking about: a response to the cry of the earth and a response to the cry of the poor. And what I'm suggesting is that food system transformation at various levels is one way to respond to this, to live this out, to be responsive to both of these cries. So let's turn to Laudato Si itself. And as I promised, I want to start right at the beginning of this very substantial document. And I'll read and gloss a little bit. So the wonderful beginning. Praise be to you, my Lord. In the words of this beautiful canticle, St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruit with colored flowers and herbs. Continuing right on to the second paragraph, so I haven't skipped any material yet. This sister now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods to which God, with the goods which God has endowed her. And I want to blow up that text there so we make sure we can see it. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and masters, entitled to plunder her at will. The violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness, evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. This is where I think we get the kind of direct pointing to our relationship as mediated through food, or indirect pointing, I should say. This is why the earth herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor. She groans in travail. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit now. We were on the second paragraph. I've moved to the 11th paragraph, which is really where I want to do the most work. So the Pope continues. Francis takes us to the heart of what it is to be human. Just as happens when we fall in love with someone, wherever he would gaze at the sun, the moon, or the smallest of animals, he burst into song, drawing all other creatures into his praise. His response to the world around him was so much more than intellectual appreciation or economic calculus. For to him, each and every creature was a sister united to him by bonds of affection. And I'll share, I remember when I first got to this point in the document, I found the language very beautiful, these metaphors of family and our relationship with the natural world very powerful. But I also found myself thinking, this is too much. This is not realistic. And then I encountered this line. Such a conviction cannot be written off as naive romanticism, for it affects choices which determine our behavior. And I take the Pope to be saying something very specific here. These ideas, may be very grand, and we're speaking in metaphors. Obviously, we are not literally, I'm not literally a sister or a brother with the animals outside my window. But the point is, how does that affect our behavior? How does that lead us into the world? And here, the Pope really has something rather remarkable and strong to say as he continues in this paragraph. So we're still in the same paragraph 11. If we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. By contrast, if we feel intimately united with all that exists, then sobriety and care will well up spontaneously. I find this a rather remarkable passage. There's really kind of two paths which the Pope is kind of setting out before us. There's, interestingly, not a lot of middle ground here. There's the possibility of speaking the language of fraternity, and that's one world, or this other world where we end up as masters, consumers, and ruthless exploiters. This is a very stark choice. Masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, versus speaking the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world. Unfortunately, I think we have a good sense, and Laudate Deum also reiterates that we're not making the right choices right now. I'll say a little bit more about this in detail, but this single statistic, which I have up here, is the one that for me most kind of encapsulates what has gone wrong in farming and in our current industrialized food system. So if I were to create a scale and put on one side of the scale every mammal on the planet, every elephant, every tiger, every bear, every dog, every cat, so on and so forth. And on the other side of the scale, I just put the cows and the goats and ourselves. 96% of the mammalian biomass would just be us. This is almost the inverse of what it was not that long ago. We have transformed the planet in many ways into a farm, which might not be a bad thing if it were a different kind of farm. This will be my final slide before I turn us over to the good news. I want to kind of try to encapsulate in a single slide here the massive significance of the animal agriculture portion of our food system, which is really the one that becomes most significant because it's also where most plants are grown. So the majority of plant agriculture ends up being fed into animal agriculture. So when we speak about animal agriculture, we're really speaking about the majority of agriculture globally today. Agriculture, or excuse me, very specifically, animal agriculture, the land for grazing and the cropland that's necessary to feed those animals occupies about a third of the land on the planet. If I'm being very precise here, we're talking about a third of the land on the planet where human beings can actually walk. So land that's not covered in water or ice. A third of that land is devoted to animal agriculture. This is just an enormous material footprint. If I move from the land to the water, I want to share a sad but rather remarkable statistic that our scientists have produced. It's called the Marine Trophic Index. It's this remarkable way that scientists can kind of take a kind of temperature of the overall health and diversity of marine ecosystems. It's this very complicated statistic that draws information from ports around the world and assembles it by the scientists that analyze it. And what it has shown us for more than a decade now is that we're actually just seeing overall decline in the vibrance of life in the ocean, something we once thought was inexhaustible. The issue, of course, that brings this group together, climate change. Depending on what analysis we look at, we will see animal agriculture be a kind of number one or number two contributor to climate change globally. We also, this is less well known, but not something that people in the virology or infectious diseases community are really in dispute about. Industrial farms and the billions of animals kept in them in these sick and often compromised conditions are a major source where new mutations occur and viruses and bacteria and then interact with humans and come into our public. This is particularly important for me, that is the animal suffering associated with this system, and feels to me especially resonant with much of what Pope Francis wrote in Laudato Si. I think we can acknowledge it's in some ways a more uncomfortable topic and not as easy perhaps to unify a coalition around, but it seems to me that part of the significance of working on this system is the direct way in which so many creatures are in its grip and suffering. And already we've talked about in mentioning these first 5 bullets many things that affect human beings. Obviously, the state of the climate affects us, the health of the ocean affects us, the reality of pandemics affects us, but we also have a direct way in which our current farming system contributes to global inequity, often along kind of racialized lines. And this is the way it ends up setting up kind of competition between people in poorer countries in the global south who essentially are competing for the land to grow crops, to grow food that they would eat, with land that's going to be used to grow crops for cattle or for the cattle themselves, and create a variety of dynamics. I'm just naming one, but that mean we have a kind of globalized food system in its current incarnation, which really tends to drive a lot of inequity. And if we try to think about all of these things together, let me try to summarize it. So we're talking about the significance of animal agriculture shaping land, shaping the water, shaping the climate, the microbiome, our relationship with animals, and our relationship with each other. I really can't think of many places where so many things that matter intersect. But if you've followed with me this far and are interested in the possibility of how we might play a role in shifting our food system, you're probably starting to think quite appropriately of all the barriers. So this is the perfect time for me to introduce you to Jennifer Channon at the Better Food Foundation, who is both the executive director there and also my wife. And she can help us understand some of the pragmatic ways we can really turn this bad news into community.
And thank you, Mark. Can everybody see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah. As Aaron said, oftentimes when we focus, when we talk about the problems in our food system, the next topic is how difficult or maybe impossible it is to address these problems. And so I want to lead you all in a presentation in which we show some of the solutions that are actually being used today in communities like our own that are really effectively changing the ways that people eat. There's going to be 3 parts to this presentation. One of them we've already mostly done. Aaron has explained a lot about why we need to change our food system and our relationship to food. Most of my presentation is going to be the how. How do we do this? In particular, I'm going to talk about nudge theory. And then we're going to do an exercise where we're actually going to get to put this theory in action and work on redesigning a menu together. Before we dive in, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So everything that I share in this presentation is available online to you. We have a website, we call it Nudge Community, and you can join Nudge Community and access recordings of the kind of presentation I'm giving now, the slide deck, but also a lot of other resources that can help you to advocate for plant-based food in your own community. And at the end of this call, I'm going to share a link. I'll also share that link to Mark so that he can email folks afterwards to join Nudge Community. And I'd like to say a little bit about myself and the Better Food Foundation. This is a photograph that I took in the fall. You can actually see the orange leaves in the background outside of the home where Erin and I live, which is in Julian, California. If any of you are familiar with it, Julian, California is in the mountains. It's about an hour outside of San Diego. And we're up so high that the leaves actually turn in the autumn and we get snow in the winter time. Um, and what's pretty special about where we live is we live in an off-grid community. And what that means is that 100% of our electricity comes from solar power. You can actually see in the photo one of our solar panels down at the bottom of our yard. Our water comes from a well. We have firewood that's been harvested from the region as part of fire prevention that we use to warm our home. And there's very little that we take from the grid in order to power our home. And when I tell people that we live off grid, people are usually like, wow, you must be, have a really low environmental footprint. And I say, well, yes, in certain ways, but in fact, the thing that Erin and I do that really has the greatest effect on our environmental footprint has nothing to do with how we get our energy or water. It's actually how we eat. And the fact that we've eaten plant-based diets, or myself mostly plant-based diets for much of our lives, actually has a much greater effect on the ecosystem, and on the environment, on the climate, than any of the other things that we do. But my impact on the environment is just the impact of one person. And before I worked at the Better Food Foundation, I was a minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in San Diego, and another church before that. And there I learned that when we have values relating to the environment, we can have a much greater impact if we share those values with others and enact them in community. And that's really the reason we started the Better Food Foundation, to see if we could act out our values in relationship to food in community. So the mission of the Better Food Foundation is to transform the systems that shape what we eat, making plant-based food the norm in places that serve millions of plates every single day. So we work in the places where food choices are made at the level of groups: cafeterias, schools, workplaces, coffee shops, events, and also churches and synagogues and other religious organizations. And we use behavioral science strategies in order to change the behaviors that guide people's food choices. We also don't do this alone. We support a growing network of organizations that we call the Plant-Based NGO Network, who are working together to shift our food systems towards plant-rich diets. Many of our partners are already using the techniques that we're going to talk about, nudges, in their work. But many of them also have other kinds of skills and services, and you can learn about these by joining our online nudge community. I want to say a little bit about terminology, because the language that we use to talk about food and diet can be contentious. And lately at the Better Food Foundation, we've been using the phrase a plant-rich diet. And I want to explain what that term means to us, because it's what I'm going to be using in this presentation. A plant-rich diet is one that's, a plant-rich diet is one that centers protein that comes from plants, right? It means we're trying to get most of our protein from plants. That includes whole foods like beans, legumes, nuts, quinoa, seeds, vegetables, fruits, and grains. And it also includes products that are protein and fiber rich that are made from those, like tofu, seitan, plant-based burgers, and things that you might buy at the grocery store. And plant-rich foods are naturally high in fiber, vitamins, and other essential nutrients. And we know that there's often health benefits associated with them, like reducing the risk of heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. But I want to emphasize that a plant-rich diet isn't necessarily a restrictive one. It can be abundant and delicious and a powerful driver of community. So Erin already said a lot about why shifting towards plant-rich diets in our communities matters. I want to dive into some of those details just a little bit, and then I'm going to move on. Um, and one of the most important details is greenhouse gas emissions. There's different estimates of the impact that animal agriculture has on greenhouse gas emissions, but all of them hover somewhere around this number of 16.5% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from animal products. And pretty much every animal product source of protein is going to have a significantly higher greenhouse gas impact than plant-based sources of those proteins. And why is that? Because sometimes it's really surprising to people why it would be so high. But we can understand it when we realize that the way that we raise animals and bring them to market for food doesn't just touch on one part of our food system or one part of our economy. It actually really impacts every single part of our economy that releases greenhouse gases. So often when we think of animal agriculture, we think of what's at the bottom of this screen. We think about what happens on the farm. But many animals needed to graze on grass, right? And in order to have that grass available to them, forests needed to be burned. That releases greenhouse gases. It takes away our carbon sinks. For animals that are fed on feedlots, you have to raise crops for them to eat. That requires fertilization. It may require clearing even more land. And you have to feed them over and over and over again. So all of the chemical use that you might go into raising those crops is many times more because you're using them to feed animals. Then, of course, those animals have to be transported, often in refrigerated trucks and cargo ships, and that, of course, uses even more energy. And then they need to be processed, often in industrial processes, in slaughterhouses, which, of course, use a lot of energy, which often comes from unsustainable sources. And so this is really just part of the story, but it helps understand why animal agriculture makes up such a big percentage of our world's greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, the environmental impacts aren't the only impacts because everything is connected. So this same industry that's incredibly intensive on our land also takes too much from humans and takes too much from workers. And so the same factories that are, polluting the environment are often the most dangerous places in America for people to work. There's some good news, though. The good news is that people, by and large, are becoming more and more open to the idea of eating plant-based. One of the drivers of this is people's greater awareness about allergies. When we work with schools, with universities, they talk about the top 9 allergies. This is a kind of terminology that they use in order to make their cafeterias more accessible. And by serving plant-based foods, you actually end up eliminating the top 4 out of those top 9 allergies. So a lot of people are shifting towards more plant-rich dining, in part to make their dining more inclusive and accessible to all. And there's 2 groups that are shifting towards plant-based or plant-rich dining more than any other. And one is young people, both Gen Alpha and Gen Z, are eating plant-based food on a regular basis, eating fully plant-based meals at least once a week, and doing so at significantly higher rates than older people. These are generations that, rather than defining themselves by a particular diet like vegetarian or vegan, are more likely to be flexitarian. They're more likely to be open to eating in different ways that are more sustainable and healthy. And they're likely to be open and accepting of eating plant-based, whether or not it aligns with some identity that they've adopted. And the second community that's driving this shift in diets is BIPOC communities, and particularly Black Americans. A really fantastic study came out a few years ago from the Pew Commission that showed that 8% of Black Americans report following a plant-based diet of some sort, and that's nearly triple the rate of white Americans. And this increase is actually growing over time, and it's being driven by organizations. One of them we work closely with is called the Afro-Vegan Society, and they point to issues like health and food justice, as well as the high prevalence of lactose intolerance in Black, Latin, and other BIPOC communities as key drivers of this change. And so you might not actually encounter as much resistance as you fear if you want to encourage people to adopt plant-rich diets. Um, but, overcoming resistance is really what we're all about. We want a world in which plant-based food is the norm, not the exception. And so we started looking for solutions that could help us overcome some of the barriers that people have to serving food differently. And I used to work as a minister at a church. So I know that when you're a leader in a community, you need to juggle many different concerns. Our values as a community, our values for the environment, our values for social justice, they're important, but we have other values that sometimes conflict. And this might be the value of being inclusive towards everyone, wanting to allow everybody freedom of choice, wanting to make sure everyone feels comforted and feels like they have access to foods that are familiar to them, and just the simple joy of eating together in community and the foods that feel traditional and meaningful to us. So I know that for leaders like myself, I needed solutions that would help us align how we eat with our values, without triggering as much resistance or fear from people who don't want to rub against some of those other values. And the solution that we found comes from the field of behavioral science, and it's actually really simple. It's let's make the best choice the easiest choice. So in their book Nudge, Nobel laureate Richard Thaler and Professor Cass Sunstein define a nudge as a small intervention that gently steers people toward a better choice without forbidding any options. And nudges have been around long before there was a name for them. Businesses have used nudges forever in order to drive profit. I'm sure you experience all the time at restaurants the way the menu is designed, the way things are set up, or trying to get you to purchase the more expensive items. I'm sure you've experienced a supermarket where certain items are just kind of easier within reach than others. But Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein were really talking about how we can use nudges for socially positive goals. And you might see this, for example, if you go to a hotel. These days, you're likely to see a sign saying, the default is that they won't give you clean towels unless you indicate that you want clean towels. And this default is a powerful nudge that helps save a lot of water. In California, there's an initiative where cities are making green power plans the default. So everyone gets the green power plan unless they opt in, check a box saying that they want the more conventional power plan. Choice architecture is a term for how options are presented to us, and it shapes our decisions far more than we realize. Next time you're in a supermarket, you might pay attention to the choice architecture around you. Consider, for example, where they put the candy in the supermarket, right? They put it at the checkout line, and not the big cheap bags of candy, but the small expensive pieces of candy, because they know that that's the location where people are likely to make impulse purchases. Pay attention to which foods are at eye level versus which ones are harder to find, what kinds of signage they put up, the kinds of colors they use. And as you pay attention to your shopping experience, you might notice that you are being steered not towards the foods that most align with your values, but instead towards foods that are probably the most profitable for businesses. But here's the empowering part. You can be a choice architect as well. Anytime you serve food, you have the power to nudge people towards healthier and more sustainable choices without taking away their freedom of choice. And so we do this kind of work in a variety of food service settings. And that's because we know that over 50% of US meals are eaten outside of the home. And so when you are serving food in your office. Maybe you're planning an event. Maybe you're hosting a potluck at your community. How you design at your church, how you design that event actually gives you a tremendous amount of power to shape people's choices and to steer them towards choices that align with their values. So I'm going to go over what we found are the top 5 nudges that are commonly used in institutions and communities like these. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, but we're going to focus on these just to get started. And I'm going to start with defaults. Plant-based defaults are the best nudge. They're the most powerful and effective nudge, and they work by making the best choice the easiest choice. When something is the default, it's what you get automatically unless you take another step and opt out of it. Defaults are extremely simple to use, they're flexible, and they tend to be cost effective. And one reason they're so powerful is because they influence social norms. What we've learned is that most people will choose what they believe other people are having. And so when something is the default, it sends the subtle social cue that it must be popular, it must be what's expected, it must be what's normal, and most people will just go along with that. You can use defaults in events, in coffee shops, cafeterias, dining halls, and hospitals. And so we're going to go through what that looks like in practice. This is actually a graph showing the results of a collection of 12 different studies that were done at universities, showing what happens when vegetarian or vegan meals were made the default. Some of these took place at events, some of them took place in cafeterias, but you can see across all 12 studies, the results are pretty similar. It's a dramatic increase in the number of people choosing plant-based meals. And this is even when people still had the option of animal products. One of these studies is one that we led and worked with several partners to do with Sodexo, which is one of the largest food service operators in the country. And we did this study at 3 universities. And over about a month and a half, we did this experiment in which we saw what happened when at a hot meal station, you made plant-based meals the default. And the results are pretty astounding. When plant-based meals were not the default, 30.8% of students chose plant-based meals. But when they were the default, that number shot up to 81.5% of students. And this, of course, had a significant impact on the food-related greenhouse gas emissions in those cafeterias. In fact, it was so successful that Sodexo decided to incorporate it into their central menu, which they offer to 400 universities all over North America. So this strategy is being expanded to hundreds of schools right now. Here's what that looked like in one of those universities in the study. At the bottom, this is what students see when they approach the hot meal station. They see in front of them the roasted sesame, ginger, tofu, tikka masala. But there's a sign up above that says that there's also chicken tikka masala, and if you would like that option, please ask the serving staff. Events are actually the easiest place to use defaults, and probably where you're most likely to get to experiment with defaults. When you're hosting an event, all you need to do to flip the default is change the language on your invitation. So at the top is the kind of language you might see in an email invitation. This is a real example that one of our student interns used. This was from the Houston Climate Summit. And at this event, they changed the language to read, as part of our commitment to reducing environmental impact, conserving resources, and promoting a sustainable and just food system, delicious plant-based meals will be served by default at this summit. Chicken or gluten-free can be provided upon request. We will do our best to accommodate. Below that, you see an event invitation like you might see if you're invited to a wedding, only with one notable difference. It says the buffet will be plant-based and gluten-free, chicken available upon request. Please indicate your dietary requests. Now, a great benefit of this approach for events especially if it's a catered event, is that then you can go to your caterer and you could say 80% of the guests ordered the plant-based meal, 20% of the guests ordered the chicken, and they don't end up overbuying on meat. So you end up having far less food waste from animal products than if they had come expecting that most people would have the animal products. Another place where plant-based defaults are being used is in coffee shops and cafes. And in fact, it's spreading incredibly fast in coffee shops and cafes. So on the left, this is a sign that was put up by the University of Michigan, which adopted a policy to make plant-based milk the default milk option in all of their cafes on their campus. And the reason for this is because oat milk is by far the winner when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions compared to other plant-based milks and cow's milks. And a Michigan dining spokesperson said, "We made oat milk the default because it's a more sustainable option with less carbon impact." But this is actually spreading all over the place. And oat milk by default is the most popular campaign that our student interns work on at their schools. We've had now close to a dozen students succeed in getting their schools to make oat milk the default in their campus coffee shops. And so this is spreading at schools around the country and around the world, as well as at commercial coffee shops. But another trend that's spreading at coffee shops is another kind of nudge, and that's the fact that coffee shops are dropping their upcharge for plant-based milk. Many of you, probably most of your lives, if you wanted oat milk or almond milk or soy milk, you had to pay extra for it in a coffee shop. Well, last year, Starbucks led the way after a campaign of several organizations in dropping that upcharge and making milks all the same price. And they were rapidly followed by Dunkin' Donuts, Pete's, Panera, and other chains. And so it's really just a matter of time before those plant-based milk upcharges are just a thing of the past. And finally, another venue where plant-based defaults have been used effectively is in hospitals. This was a study that we led in 2022, working with New York City Health and Hospital, which is a hospital system that includes 11 hospitals, to see what happens when they make plant-based meals the default for their patients. So patients are offered a plant-based meal, but then they're asked, would you like to see the other options? And those other options include animal product meals. And this was so successful that the hospitals decided to expand it. It had been a pilot during their lunch menu. And so later that year, they expanded it to their dinner menu. Then they made it permanent. And now Sodexo, which is the company that serves food at these hospitals, is in the process of rolling it out to hundreds of their hospitals nationwide. There were some other pretty remarkable results from this pilot. One is that it saved the hospital system money. It saved 59 cents per meal in the hospital system, which added up to a lot. It had a high diner satisfaction rate of 98%. And remember, this is hospital food, which usually people aren't pretty happy with. It led to a significant reduction in carbon emissions. And what's not written on here is that more than 50% of diners ended up choosing plant-based meals when it was the default, even though less than 1% of them indicated that they were vegetarian or vegan. So that's default, and we spent a lot of time on it because it really is the most powerful nudge, but there's other nudges, and I'm going to go through them a little more quickly. Nudge number 2 is climate-friendly ratios. With this nudge, we're making the best choice the most abundant choice. And what we recommend is offering at minimum a 2-to-1 ratio of plant-based meals to animal-based meals. And so if folks want animal products, they're still available, they're just less abundant. And the reason we suggest a 2-to-1 ratio is, again, we want to influence social norms. We want to send the idea that plant-based meals are normal here. There's a lot of them, so they're probably good. It's probably what most people are having. And this works in settings like restaurants, events, cafeterias, and schools. And so here's what that looks like on a restaurant menu. So this is a real menu from the Front Street Cafe in Philadelphia. And you can see in their shareable section, they have 6 items. 5 out of those 6 items are fully plant-based. Only one of them, the chicken tenders, has meat in it. But if you were going out with a group of friends and there was amidst your group of friends a couple people who really wanted to eat meat, there would be nothing preventing them from eating at this restaurant. But in the meantime, they'd be highly tempted to try all of these other really delicious sounding plant-based foods. Nudge number 3 is prime placement. This nudge makes the best choice the most visible choice. And of course, this is also extremely easy and simple to implement. And an ideal place to use this nudge is at events, when you're serving things on a buffet table, if you have a cafeteria, or on menus. And so imagine yourself, lining up for a buffet. When you're using this nudge, we recommend that you put the hot, delicious plant-based meals at the start of the buffet. So people fill up their plate with, for example, the vegetarian chili. And then towards the end of the display, you can add animal products, but as an add-on, not as the main dish. So you still might have a bowl of cheese or of chicken bits for folks to add, but it's not what they're filling up their plate with. There's other nudges that you can add to this. You can use the size of the utensils or the size of the bowls to indicate people that you should take a lot or you should just take a little. But placement is just a really simple nudge to use. Nudge number 4 is subtle substitutions and blends. With this, we're swapping out animal ingredients with plant-based ingredients. And this works especially well in baked goods or burgers or recipes where animal products are an ingredient that people don't necessarily notice. So we see this being used in restaurants and cafeterias and schools, bakeries, and coffee shops. And this is being facilitated by the fact that there are more and better plant-based ingredients now than there ever have been before. So if you're looking for something to swap out for butter, for milk, for eggs, you're going to find a wide variety of options, and many of them are really high quality and increasingly affordable. But we really just encourage you to research what's available in your area and what's going to be popular with the people that you're serving food to. This is a nudge that was used in a K-12 school district called Cherry Creek for all of their baked goods. They decided that they were going to remove all of the animal ingredients from their baked goods. This was an effective way for them, again, to make all of their food more allergen friendly, right? So if you imagine a kid who has a milk allergy, now they don't have to worry about any of the baked goods in the entire cafeteria. And they swapped eggs and milk powder for applesauce and soy oil. This had an impact on their carbon emissions. It saved the school district money. And what they discovered is that students didn't actually taste the difference. There was nobody noticed that the baked goods weren't made the same way they were previously. Another increasingly popular way to use subtle substitutions is by blending plant-based ingredients with animal ingredients. This is increasingly done in things like burgers and nuggets. Several school systems, for example, university systems offer blended burgers, where the burger is half mushroom that's been blended with beef. And this, of course, significantly decreases the carbon footprint of that burger. But there's also a growing number of products that are being put out for the intentional purpose of being blended with meat in order to serve burgers or meatloafs or patties that are 50% or only 30% animal ingredients. And of course, there's health benefits to get people to eat more veggies. We've known for years that if you hide vegetables in your kids' brownies, you can get them to eat them. And apparently this works for grown-ups too. And finally, nudge number 5 is tasty titles and descriptions. With this nudge, we are changing how we describe food on our menus and in our events in order to focus on how delicious they are. So tasty titles should focus on taste, on texture, on location. And imagine going to a restaurant and seeing on the menu something that's called a vegetarian wrap. That doesn't sound very enticing. But if it was instead called a Mediterranean chickpea wrap or a protein-packed chipotle tofu wrap, it's probably going to be a lot more attractive to you. So I recommend actually looking at plant-based restaurants in your area to see some of the creative titles that they've come up with for their meals. So I pulled these titles from Plant Power Fast Food here in San Diego because they sound really delicious to me. And so, you can get creative with the titles. We have a guide that's available on our website of what kind of language to use when you're describing food on a menu or an event invitation. And the basic gist is emphasize the positives rather than the negatives. Instead of saying what the food is free from, say what it's rich in. Instead of focusing on how something is vegetarian or vegan or meat-free, describe it as plant-rich or plant-based or plant-centered. And of course, use a description that helps people understand how good the food is going to taste. And so to recap, the top 5 nudges are plant-based defaults, climate-friendly ratios, prime placement, subtle substitutions, and tasty titles and descriptions. And I want to say one little word. If you're going to, try doing this, say, in your church, and maybe you're part of your church's green team or your office's green team, I want to give a little advice about your promotional plan. Because oftentimes when we work on sustainability projects, we start right out the gate by saying, hey, we're going to do a sustainability initiative. Over the next few months, this is the changes that we're going to make to our food, to our energy, to da-da-da-da-da. How exciting. Nudges work because they are subtle. And so we actually recommend that the best time to do a promotional plan about your nudge initiative is after you've tried it for a while. And you can get away with this because remember, we're not taking away people's choices. All we're doing is rearranging the choice architecture. And so if you're worried that there might be people in your community who are going to be resistant to this change at the get-go, who are going to be like, plant-based food, I don't want that. Let them just experience what it's like to be served food for a little while, when it's nudged towards them, when it's described as delicious, when it's more abundant. And then after you've been doing that for a while, that's a great time to share the results, to say, this is the impact that we've had. Here's the water we saved. Here's the carbon emissions that we saved. You can learn a lot more about the research on this on our website, as well as by joining the Nudge community. And I'm going to pause here because I think Mark said that you often take a little break in these calls. And I might want to give folks a chance to just, Mark, do you think folks could use a little break and then we come back and use the rest of the time for the activity, or do you want to keep going?
I think we could keep going unless anybody really wants to take a break.
Yeah, and so, I'll read out loud what some of your suggestions were. So under the shareable and taste of Asia section, make sour cream and chili plant-based. You can do that by swapping out ingredients. Adding a veggie samosa item that would increase the quantity of plant-based foods. Come up with a better name than vegetarian spring rolls. That's right. Describe what's in the spring rolls. The ratios need help. You can have meat be an add-on rather than being integrated into the dish. You can have, call one of the dishes spicy roasted Brussels sprouts. That sounds pretty delicious. You can add a plant-based burger and put it on the top of the list, so making it in a more visible location. Ooh, pan-fried truffle mushroom dim sum with dipping sauce. Yep, that's a really delicious title. You can have dairy cheese be something that you add on. Under the burgers and mains, you can add a plant-based stir fry with optional or seafood add-ons. Instead of calling something mixed vegetables, which is pretty boring, call it a fresh veggie medley. Make the veggie options more abundant. Add a cauliflower steak, eggplant parmigiana, mushroom pastas. There's a lot of things that could be added to this menu. Um, on add-ons in size, move all of the animal sources here. That's right. So all of the animal ingredients could be things that you add on rather than being things that are mixed into the dish. Instead of calling something boiled rice, call it savory rice, cilantro rice. Yeah, so these are all a lot of great ideas for how to make this menu much more accessible to people who want to eat plant-based, but also encourage people to eat plant-based foods, even if that's not why they showed up. So let's go back to the main room and let's use the rest of our time for Q&A. Any questions that you might want to ask me or Erin?
Sure, thank you. I'm not sure where the question is in here, but plant-based, I had sort of an education a couple of years ago, and I thought, okay, I'll give this a try. And the verbiage that stuck with me was whole food plant-based. And so it's more than just not animal agriculture, it's also less processed food. But there's also this other phrase that comes from the faith tradition called eating in solidarity. And
Mm,
so sometimes you might, especially if you have the opportunity to go to a nice restaurant, there might be some really amazing things there, but like it's imported specialty items. And so I think sometimes the encouragement on eating more simply, maybe that's maybe that's where my question is, eating lower on the food chain and then
mm,
also maybe eating more simply and in solidarity with people who have less, because fancy imported mushrooms from France, fancy imported cheese from Italy, fancy imported rice from Taiwan or Japan. It probably, I'm not saying it probably has a way smaller carbon footprint and a smaller um, animal cruelty index, but at the same time, it's still, there's a humility that that could be, increased there. So I don't know where I'm really going with that question, but um, yeah, maybe eating in solidarity would be another way of phrasing some of these
yeah.
things. I like that all these nudges and everything, I think they assume institutional buy-in. And so now I have an increased understanding of what I might try at my diocese.
Yeah.
Hey, if nothing else in Lent, which Lent is a long time from now, it's a good 8 or 9 months from now, but still, if they would buy off on all the hospitality that we do in our diocese this coming Lent, um, started with plant-based options. And I'm in Southern California, a little bit probably east of you guys. And so we start with rice,
Mhm.
beans, and tortillas. And so maybe we can go with simpler, eating in solidarity with people who are poorer than us, and maybe that will help. I don't know, because we do also have in our diocese some attitudes that are very, uh, kind of macho, and so they're very meat
Yeah.
oriented. And don't try to take my meat away from me because I need my meat, and they
Right.
really don't need their meat, but
Yeah.
they think they do.
Yeah. Well, what you raised about institutional buy-in is pretty key to this because the main reason we started, advocating for nudges is because we were getting pushback from institutional leaders, and they were afraid of getting pushback from people eating in their communities. What I find is the case with nudges is that they often don't require a kind of top-down policy. But they do at least need the buy-in of the people who are organizing the event or serving the food or, ordering the menu, which are often people in the middle of an institution, not necessarily at the top. And so if you can get buy-in from some key individuals who are involved in serving the food, that's often all it takes to try some of this out.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Great advice and
Yeah.
experience. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Carol, do you want to ask your question?
Well, I have many. My daughter's getting married in September, and we are trying to have it more plant-based. And I was just curious if there's any specific recommendations for wedding ceremonies. Um, and is there any books that I can reference? But I am definitely, we're going to try this with the Youth Summit. We recently here in Sacramento area had 300 youth come up to advocate for the environment, for housing and immigration. And I got a lot of, I believe, a little bit of slack for telling all the kids that no, we were not going to be serving any water bottles, no water, and everybody had to bring theirs. And they agreed, the top leads agreed to that because they said, I said, if we're, focused on the environment, we, we should definitely do this. But I didn't push them enough on this other option. And so I'm going to do my very utmost to make it happen next year for the big summit. It's the California Summit of Laudato Si movement that the kids come to and legislate for environmental policy. So I'm going to let you know how it goes. But what books would you recommend, or so I could read up on how to approach this in a positive way to get the most buy-in from the top?
Yeah, well, I don't know anything specific to weddings. I actually would love for us to create a kind of wedding guide. But weddings are the easiest because of that event invitation. You send everyone an invitation in advance and they indicate what they want to eat. And so if you're not going to serve completely plant-based and you want people to have the option saying, meals will be plant-based, but write in if you would like the alternative, like that's a pretty effective way to get most people to choose the plant-based meals. Then the challenge, of course, is you need a caterer who actually makes good plant-based food. Because when we had our wedding, that was a challenge. We ended up getting our wedding catered from Native Foods because we knew the food was really, really good. But a lot of wedding caterers, you got to make sure the food actually tastes good. Um, let's see. I recommend this book. This isn't specifically about plant-based food, but it's about nudging in general. And it's just a very easy to understand book about, just how it works in a variety of different settings.
All
And
right.
yeah,
Thank you. And I'm literally, I've got to read this because I'm on the core committee that plans for all the Catholic youth who are supporting Laudato Si and the Laudate Deum network. So they really should be embracing this messaging. And so, I just need to know how to reference this from the very get-go so that we move into that from the early state so that everybody knows when we plan the menu that that's going to be the top priority. So thank you for this is just incredible. I've never heard about Nudge, and I feel very ignorant of not knowing about this. So thank you for opening my eyes to this incredible topic.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Marilyn, you had more? Another question?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no.
No, well, it kind of seems like people more than 100 years ago in our country lived in a simpler time, and that somehow over the last, 80 or so years, the messaging from our society itself, from the society itself, has been how important meat is and protein is, animal-based protein. And so, are there ways you would recommend that we, kind of try to turn people back to simpler times when not only did people not have, animal protein 3 meals a day, but that they seem to do fine without it? And you look around and waistlines are,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because you have to be careful where you go there, or it starts to poke people in the eyes, and you don't want to
Yeah.
do that. You want to invite.
Yeah. Well, I'll say a little bit, this also, comes from behavioral psychology, but it's also common sense, which is if you can connect with the values that people already hold rather than trying to change their values, they're probably going to be more open to talking to you. So if someone is convinced that they need a lot of protein because they're a man or because they're an athlete, and that's just something they believe really strongly, You might emphasize to them that there's really healthy sources of plant-based protein and come with them armed with the data about, lentils and chickpeas and athletes who are using them. Because that's easier than trying to get them to change their associations with like meat and masculinity, for example. If somebody has uh, uh, let's say a strong fear of scarcity, you might want to like, emphasize that they can have an abundant and delicious lifestyle. And, maybe that's going to be more important to them than the longer journey of embracing simplicity, which I agree is something as a planet we all need to do.
Do you have any data on costs? You alluded to it
In the
in one of your
pilots
studies.
that we've done, yeah, because it's real funny because you go online and you see all these debates and everyone's like, plant-based food is so expensive. And everyone's like, no, it's just beans. It's not expensive. And I think we kind of have to be honest with people that plant-based eating should be inexpensive and simple and accessible, but our society often makes it expensive and inaccessible. But that's a societal problem. It's not a problem with the food itself. Um, in all the work we do with institutions, generally when they switch to, whole food plant-based ingredients like beans, they save money because they tend to be cheaper than meat. But then they use kind of, you know, meat analogs, things that kind of look and work like chicken, but are made from like pea protein. Those tend to cost a bit more. They shouldn't cost more because the ingredients are actually really inexpensive, but right now they tend to cost more. So we generally advocate that people, use a mix of both because people like those meaty tasting things sometimes, but they also, don't want to spend that much money. And so if you want to keep things cost neutral, the more kind of whole foods you include, the more likely you're going to be able to do that.
That's wonderful. I'm curious of people in the audience, how you feel about taking this back to your parishes or schools or other groups you work with. I, Father Jack, do you have a question?
Yes. How are you? This is a
Welcome.
this is a great program. Uh, it speaks very much to me. Prior to becoming a priest 35 years ago or thereabout, I graduated from the CIA, Culinary Institute of America. So the sense of food is paramount. I'm French. I come from a line of chefs. And the parishioners know that. I'm over here in Oakland, and they're even for Mother's Day, we gave gifts of measuring spoons because a teaspoon of love and a half a teaspoon of patience goes a long way.
Oh.
So I do share. I share that, and people know about that. I remember while I was at the ashram in India, I lived in an ashram sponsored by the missionary oblates, how the guru, the director, would say, an elephant is very strong, but they don't eat any meat. And so he would always say that, and he was not a tiny man either. Uh, but that idea of giving options, and I think that sense of solidarity that I heard speaks loudly. This year we did a soup and bread thing, which I know many parishes do. We brought it back, and that sense of solidarity and community was powerful. So a lot of the things that you talked about nudging came back to me as a chef on how to prepare menus and how do you prepare things of that nature that draws people's attention. And then at the end, you put in the roast beef or whatever it is, but you have all of these other choices before. And I'll just close with a real sense of it. in a large group, it's not an either or, but both and. Because you're dealing with cultures, with certain foods and traditions that symbolize who they are. And so it's how to embrace the totality. Because we know that a meat option was a rare event in many villages. And we don't understand that
Yeah.
because it's every day for us. And so it's how to do that cutback, how to do mindful menu preparation that serves the needs of the wider community. But
Mhm.
the insights you shared today were spot on, I thought.
Yeah, thank you. That was I love the elephant story. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
And I know we're reaching our time. I want to just respond to Rachel's comment, and I think in some ways, Father Jack, you've already said some of these things. I just want to acknowledge this can be overwhelming. This can be, the world is a diverse and broken place, and when you start to realize how far we can go with food, it can feel really overwhelming. So I want to acknowledge that is often how I have felt with this work. And then just to kind of remind you of some of the happy statistics that Jennifer shared. I mean, that's really why these techniques have been so transformative, because they show us that, yeah, the resistance is there. This is not going to be a simple transformation. Food changes slowly over time. Um, but these techniques have demonstrated in groups that have no particular sympathy with this issue, folks who aren't reading Laudato Si and talking about these issues, change is possible with just a few people who care. So I think we can be both legitimately overwhelmed and hopeful at the same time, which is a complicated balance to navigate.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. I can't thank you enough, Aaron and Jennifer. This is just absolutely, your work is stunning. It's everything that I think we need to continue sharing. I mean, people say, well, why are you just about praying? Well, praying is very practical too. And we have in Christianity, especially, we're always talking about it being incarnational, about the what we what is here in the body, and what we experience in life is sacred. It's not that we're just aiming for an otherworldly thing. And so the food is so central to people. So doing this, I appreciate people saying, being mindful of not excluding people or pushing this, and just a gentle way. I think that really is a model for this. I mean, one of my things about environmental movement in general is that it can kind of become legalistic and kind of what I call green shaming, where people really feel canceled because of what they're doing. And so we can go gently. We can try to make significant changes, but still being gentle. And so I think this really captures that. So I can't thank you enough. And we will post the presentations and the recording on our website, and it's so wonderful to be in solidarity. And it's also so touching to us to hear people not in the Catholic tradition appreciating what teachings we've been given in Laudato Si and Laudato Deum, and hearing how you appreciate it. And the reality is that actually a lot of times in this work of care for creation, we find more non-Catholics appreciating those documents than Catholics, unfortunately, in a lot of locations. So that's what's part of our work. So thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for putting that link, Jennifer, about the nudge community. So any other closing encouragements for us?
Oh, well, I mean, just that this has been uh, uh, we have, more than 100 students every year who we train, who are excited to go out and create a plant-based world. And each year they accomplish real meaningful things in their communities. So this is possible. We are able to influence food change beyond ourselves. And so, yeah, it's just exciting to see folks get started and see them make real accomplishments.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Gentle and significant were two of the words you said, Mark, that I really liked. Gentle and significant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.